And we're live. Good to be back, guys. Thank you for watching this video. I want to talk about negotiating car leases, how to negotiate them, how to do it properly, maybe some mistakes, and I'm just going to share my experiences. And I've leased 3 vehicles, somewhere within 8 years, something like that, right? All of them were 3-year leases. Um, so 36 month term leases. And I'll start with the first one. So the first one, my credit was somewhere, let's say, in the sevens. Um, excuse me. And I knew I didn't want to put any down payment. So for me, one of the most important things was zero down. I had somehow come across the idea that I can get a car with zero down if I leased it. I always knew that financing, I'd have to put some sort of down payment. And so initially, I needed a car because I had a second vehicle, I had a truck that I own outright that I financed when I was actually my dad, and that's another story, but he helped me finance a used vehicle, a used truck, and then when I was in high school, and then when I got out of high school and started working, he said, "All right, it's time to pay me back," and so I had to pay him until I paid that vehicle off. So I had a second car, right? But the important thing was I needed a car that was good on gas. That was the biggest thing because I was started to drive a lot in sales, in insurance sales. And so I started looking at different vehicles. I remember looking at BMWs and a bunch of different stuff. I'm like, nah, I can't even do this when I saw the payments. But I found a Volkswagen Jetta that looked really nice. And this is like 7 years ago, let's say. Um, no, more. This is like maybe nine years ago, and it was like zero down, 185 a month or something like that. Um, it was a 10,000 mile limit on it, year, and it was a 3-year lease, but zero money down and 185 out the door, including taxes and insurance and everything. So I remember that was my first lease. I didn't know how to negotiate at that time, leases. I just kind of, it was all new to me. Um, so I had that car for like 2 years, and I started getting calls from the dealership. Hey, do you want to turn it in early and get another lease? And long story short, I did. And they basically, what they do at that point is it's a lease return, but you're getting another lease with the same dealership. So they kind of waive any expenses that you would have on a lease return. Um, Usually they have to do an inspection and all kinds of other stuff that goes down. Um, but the reason that I chose leasing, and I don't think people realize that you could do a zero money down type of lease, or even walk out of the dealership with a car without putting any money out of your pocket, which is something that for me was big. Just always thought I'd rather have that money in my bank account. I'd rather have that money, invest that money in stocks or whatever the case, and not put it towards a car that I knew was just depreciating. It was going to be worth less and less over time. So that's what I did. I ended up getting the first lease, and then I got the second lease. And the second lease, what I did was I did a 12,000 mile year, because I knew I was driving more, and on the first lease I had passed the 10,000 miles a year limit, and so I ended up having to pay for extra miles. So on the second year I did 12,000 miles a year. No, the second lease I did 12,000 miles a year, and so that gave me more flexibility. Um, and then the other thing was, and I eventually got the third lease. They were all Jettas, all three of them, all Volkswagen Jettas, and I was leasing them from the same dealership. So the way that I would go in there is basically with the idea of, look, I'm going to put zero money down. That's like my non-negotiable. And every time they would come and be like, hey, if you put this amount down, your payment drops by this, that. But then by the third time, they understood, right? It's like zero money down. That's it. I'm looking for payments based off of that. And then what they have to do is they would come to me and, they would bring a certain car that they needed to sell or move or whatever the case, and it wasn't selling, or they had a special going on, and they would bring it to me and they'd be like, hey, do you want it? Here's the payment. And what I would do is I would set a number. So, like, I had a number that I would tell them what I wanted to pay, and I didn't want to go over that. And that included taxes and insurance. That's one thing, because, like, if they're giving you the number without taxes and insurance, it's not the real number. Um, Actually, let me take that back. Without taxes, that's the big one. So if they give you just the lease amount without taxes included, it's not the real number. The insurance you do on your end, and that can obviously add to your payment quite a bit, especially if you're a younger driver, have things on your record. You're getting a sporty car or fast car, or an expensive car. All of that affects the insurance. So I ended up, also the area you live in. I ended up, by the way, that's in California. I ended up getting the third lease. And, for me, after having leased 3 vehicles, and I just turned in the third lease early, they actually gave me an equity payout. I made another video on that, on how that actually works, because the lease, when you have a close-ended lease, you have the right to buy your vehicle outright, or finance it, and you don't have to turn that lease back in, which is pretty cool. Especially like if you've taken care of the car, right? If you've had issues with that vehicle over the last 3 years, you may not want to turn that in. I'm sorry, you may want to turn that in. You may not want to keep it. And so basically, the way to negotiate, the way that I negotiated it, was just having non-negotiables, right? That sounds funny, but knowing that you're going to put zero money down, knowing what your monthly payment is that you feel comfortable with. Don't let them tell you this is what you can afford. You tell them this is what I feel comfortable with. That's how you, like, because you can get carried away, right? You can go into the place and they're like, oh, but you can afford this vehicle. You can afford this vehicle. It's like, yeah, but this is what I want my payment to be. And one thing that I learned by the third lease, or the second lease, with I didn't account for on the first one, was the insurance. Because I remember the car was $185 a month, and I remember meeting with my buddy, and I was bragging about it. I got it zero down and what my payment was. My buddy Felipe, he's like, "Oh, cool. What's your out of pocket?" I'm like, "Yeah, just $185 a month." And he's like, "No, with insurance and gas and all that, whatever other expenses." And I'm like, "Oh shoot, I never thought about it like that." But it's not just 185. It was like over $100 in insurance, and then obviously gas, and then registration each year. And in California, that was expensive, right? It was. I remember it was. I mean, it's only gone up, but I think the last time I paid it, it was like $300 for the annual registration, like $350 or $320, something like that. So, anyways, those are things to think about. Like when you're going in, don't let them push you one way or another. Look, I have friends that are in the dealerships. I have nothing against them. I think they're cool people. You know, there's a famous scene in The Godfather where he says, "It makes no difference to me how a man makes a living. It's just that your business is dangerous," right? And that's Don Corleone telling that to one of the guys who's proposing him to get into drugs. There's no difference to me how a man makes a living. Okay, if you're in the dealership, if you're doing insurance, whatever you're doing, right? But if you go into the dealership, you need to know what you want already, have a good idea. And I would strongly recommend, if you're going to lease a vehicle, look at options with zero money down, because keep that money in your bank account. That's just the way I look at it, right? If you, I'm talking to you as if I were like your older brother. If my one of my younger sibling comes to me and asked me for advice, it kind of that concept. Or if I wanted to just share with them, hey, think about this, think about that. Um, well, the biggest one is zero money down, and it's something that you can actually do. And if they try to tell you no, those programs don't exist, blah blah blah, it's not true. It's not true. There are programs. Now you have to have good credit, right? Or decent credit, and that's going to affect your payment. So if you know ahead of time kind of what the range of your credit score is, and that's one thing that I think is pretty cool with. I saw it recently with Chase Bank. They give you like an idea of what your credit score is. They don't run it. It's just like a credit journey, it's called. You could kind of print that out and take that to them and show them roughly what your credit is at, so that they don't actually run it, because when they run a hard credit report, that affects your credit. You can only do so many in a given year. That's a different story. But leasing is a really good thing. The other thing is, with my leases, I put some miles on those cars. I really drove them. I mean, I was driving a little fast here and there, and I was hugging the curves, and I was putting some wear on the vehicle, right? And so it depends how you drive it, right? So after 2 years, 3 years, I was like, I probably am better off turning the car in versus keeping it, because you get the way you treat a car. Now, I've always taken care of my stuff. I'm not making it sound like, I don't want to make it sound like I was just racing all the time and stuff. But if you take care of your vehicle throughout those 3 years and you had a good experience with it, it might make sense just to keep it after. I just always liked the idea of, I needed something reliable because I was driving a lot, and I needed something that was decently presentable. But, in sales, that's one thing that, like, some people get expensive car payments, and once you got that payment, you're locked in. It's hard to get out of it. I remember this guy, this buddy I met. He's like, well, I've known him for a long time, but he one time he told me that his car payment was $1,000 a month. He's like, do you want it? You want the car? And I was thinking to myself, what? Now that was I think he was financing that, but still, you can get into leases that are very expensive, and you just need to know what your budget is. Don't go over it. Don't let someone influence you at the dealership or anywhere else, right? Get the car that fits you, what you feel comfortable each month paying, and give yourself time. Don't make a press decision because of a incentive or a holiday or something like that. Like, there's going to be other deals. The dealerships are in the business of moving cars, right? That's what they need to sell. And you are in the power position. That's the way I look at it. Like, if you're the one who can sign and make the deal happen, you're in the power position. It's been interesting the last few years with the pandemic how there were so little cars, right, available, and so dealerships were somewhat in the power position. But at the end of the day, there's no deal without a customer. So you still have the upper hand. You still have the ability to negotiate, and that's the way I negotiated mine. Honestly, very friendly, cordially. I made buddies with them. They became my customers in the insurance when I was selling life insurance. I mean, we ended up being buddies, and we're still cool today. But I was always solid with what I wanted, and when they would try to push me to get a car that maybe was out of my budget, or I didn't want to spend that much on it, I was just really clear, like, hey, it's not gonna happen, And I think if you are straightforward with people, they'll appreciate it, and it also wastes. You're not wasting your time, or their time, and so they'll appreciate that. But I do, if you're looking into car leases, check them out, see what you can get with zero down, and I wish you guys good luck on that. Take care.